Hi everyone, welcome again to another session of Learning Together. This time, let's talk about authentic assessment in language teaching. At the end of the session, you are expected to learn what are the different types of authentic assessment that can be used in a certain language classroom. We already learned in the previous discussion. I will just link the video here that authentic assessment is highly advised. So maybe you will ask, what is authentic assessment and why it is needed to be used in the language classroom, especially if we have uh, LEP students or the LEP students, they are called as the limited English proficient students. Simply testing an isolated skill or a retained fact does not effectively measure a student's capability. To accurately evaluate what the student has learned, an assessment method must examine his or her collective abilities. Because when we focus or when we are going to use only one type of assessment, we call it objective. A type of assessment, we can only measure one aspect, but when we use this authentic assessment, or we term this one as performance assessment, real world assessment, we can assess the holistic learning of our students. The term authentic assessment describes the multiple forms of assessment that reflect student learning, achievement, it could be motivation, and attitudes on instructional relevant classroom activities. Oftentimes, traditional assessments, I am referring to the common assessments that we use inside the classroom, just like the multiple choice test, essays, fill in the blank, and objective type of responses, are heavily language dependent. These content assessments quickly become English proficiency tests rather than the measure of what students know. As what I have said, authentic assessment is highly advised for LEP students or the limited English proficient students because they have this um, high level of difficulty when it comes to expressing the mastery of the content unless they have a certain level of English proficiency. For example, as what I have given the examples earlier, if a student is struggling with sequential vocabulary, for example, he or she cannot compose a certain essay in something. However, if that particular student is given the opportunity to do hands-on type of assessment through experimentation or pictures, that particular student or the same student may be able to demonstrate the knowledge of that particular content. While some authentic forms of assessment can be time consuming, they are worth the effort when working with students who have often high anxiety levels under traditional testing situations, just like multiple choice or true or false modified alternate response and so on, and who maybe simply need additional time to complete the test or the task. Because in here, in the authentic assessment, they are given the vast opportunity to exhibit what they know, what they learned, what they have, um, the overall learning when it comes to language. Now, there are some goals, or the authentic assessment in language teaching generally accomplishes the following goals. The first one here emphasizes what students know rather than what they do not know. Here in the authentic assessment, as long as they can demonstrate, um, they can perform whatever that be as a teacher, as an observer, whatever they have in that certain performance or output, we can really measure that those are the things that they have learned for the entire period of time. Next, require students to develop responses instead of selecting them from predetermined options. So in the objective type of assessment, or in the traditional assessment, it is expected to have only one correct answer. But here in the authentic assessments, the students are given the opportunity to adapt or to have this multiple way of accomplishing the task depending on what or how they are going to do it, as long as they can accomplish the task being given to them following the set criteria in the objectives. Next is directly evaluates holistic projects. Since authentic assessment requires direct or hands-on experimentation, hands-on activities, so it measures really direct learning from the students. It uses samples of student work collected over an extended period of time. If we incorporate authentic assessment, just like portfolio assessment in the classroom, we can really document the progress of learning. Next, stems from clear criteria made known to students and parents. So in doing this authentic assessment, as per the previous video, it is said to have for as a teacher to set this clear criteria or evaluating criteria or a rubric or a checklist of the performance. So there you can see what are the things that they need to do. Elicits higher order thinking skills. So this is the most important in assessing the students, that we must not settle in the lots or lower order thinking skills. They must be presented with higher order thinking skills. In the authentic assessments, they are given the opportunity to think of their own thinking, to have their creativity on how they can accomplish the task at hand. Unlike with the traditional one, we have the traditional assessment, just like multiple choice, it has only one answer. But this will really trigger the student's creativity to accomplish a certain task at hand. Next, allows the possibility for multiple human judgment. In doing the assessment as a teacher, this will really require subjective judgment. That's why we have this rubric or checklist as basis for us to evaluate the performance of our students. In here, the evaluator is given, or the students will be judged according to different perspective of the evaluator or the assessor. Next, relates more closely to classroom learning. It teaches the students to evaluate their own work. So this is the beauty of authentic assessments, because the students is given the opportunity to have this assessment as learning, to monitor their own progress, to think about their own learning, whether they have learned or not, to assess, to self-assess. Next, considers differences in learning styles, language proficiencies, cultural and educational backgrounds, and grade levels. These could affect the learning, the objective and the subjective needs or information of the learners can affect how the English language learner learns a language. So here in authentic assessment, there is a wide consideration of those learning styles. If the students can learn this way, so we have to give them that opportunity. It is said, based on principle, that we have to teach according to the learning styles of the learners. So here in the authentic assessment, they are given the opportunity to do the task according to how they like it. For example, they are given this language task, and then they will sing it. So they are free to do it as long as the same task or the objective of that particular task is achieved. And then there is also the consideration of the language proficiency of the students, including the cultural and the educational background. We cannot deny the fact that we are Filipinos, we are not perfect in learning the language, so there should be, as a teacher, there should be considerations of those factors. Okay? So generally, based on the source, these are the authentic assessment goal that in the language classroom that we are trying to achieve. Now, we have to learn what are the different types of authentic assessment that we can use as teachers of language or language teachers that we can use inside our language classroom. The first one we have here, oral interview. So here in the oral interview, the teacher asks the students questions about personal background, activities, readings, and interests. In that particular situation, the students will be able to express his or her self. So we can measure, we can assess how the students pronounce the words, the sentence construction, and the conversational skills of the students. The advantages of this particular assessment is that it is informal and relaxed context. So you can talk things, under the sun and then assess the students' responses. Okay, conducted over successive days with each student, and we can record the observations in an interview guide, or we can record with a recording device, and then we listen to it and assess according to the stipulated guidelines whether the students have achieved or not. Next, the second one here is story or test retelling. So the students retell the main ideas or the selected details of the text experience through listening or reading. So the advantages could be the students produces oral report, or it could be a written report, and then can be scored on content or language components. It can be scored as well in a rubric or a rating scale, and we can determine the reading comprehension as long as he or she can retell the main ideas or can retell the story. So more or less we can conclude that this particular student is really understood a particular story. Okay, reading strategies, and of course language development. Next type of assessment, we have the writing samples. Students generate narrative, expository, persuasive, or reference paper depending on what type of paper you are requiring the students to submit. So the disadvantage or the advantages for writing samples, students can produce written document. It can be scored on content or language components, scored with rubric or rating scale, and it can be determined the writing progress or the writing skill of the students. Next is the project or exhibiting. Students complete project in a content area, especially for language, working individually or in pairs. Advantages of that particular assessment is that the students can make formal presentation, written report, or it could be both. The written report will be presented. It can be observed, oral and written products and thinking skills, especially for higher order thinking skills. And of course, it can be scored with a rubric or a rating scale. Next type of assessment, we have this one, experimentations or experiments and demonstrations. The students complete experiment or demonstrate the use of material. So some of the advantages of that particular assessment, students can make oral presentation, written report, or both oral and written report, can observe oral and written products and higher order thinking skills, and of course it can be scored with rubric or a rating scale. Next, constructed response items. So the students respond in writing to open-ended questions. We have to take note the open-ended questions. Some of the advantages for this one, students produces written report, and it usually scored on substantive information in higher order skills, and of course it can be scored with the rubric or rating scale. As what I have as you noticed, I keep on mentioning rubric and rating scale because here in authentic assessment, performance assessment, or alternative assessment, rubric is really a partner for this one, a rating scale, in order for us to have basis in grading or in assessing our students. Next, teacher observations. Teacher observation. So the teacher observes the student attention, responds to instructional materials, and interactions with other students. So some of the advantages for this particular type of assessment, it can be set, or the setting is a classroom environment, and then it also takes a little time because you will just be, as a teacher, you will just be sitting in the classroom and observe how the students are doing inside the class, and then it can be recorded or record observations with anecdotal notes or rating scale. When you do observations, especially if that is formal observations, you must have this one, a sheet of paper containing what are the possible skills that you need to see, you need to observe from your students. And the last one here is portfolio or portfolios. It is a focused collection of student work to show progress over time. When it comes to the discussion of what is a portfolio, I will just link the link here. Okay, some of the advantages for using portfolio as assessment are: first, it integrates information from a number of sources because you are documenting the student's progress over time. And then it is a strong evidence, or it has the strong student involvement and commitment. And of course, for portfolio assessment, this is really the advocate of student self-assessment or assessment as learning. In the portfolio assessment, there is an area for self-reflection. Okay? So these are the types of authentic assessment that we can use in a language classroom. This is taken from the authentic assessment for English language learners, practical approaches for teachers by J. Michael Malay and Lorraine Valdez Pierce.